Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we're talking about contracts. I heard you loud and clear when I did a poll on my Instagram just a couple days ago asking you, would you rather talk about this or this? And resoundingly, you guys said contracts. What do we need to have inside of our contract so that we're covered and we're protected and we're not gonna get sued? So I'm gonna go into 10 things that you need to have inside of your photography contract, specifically a wedding photography contract. But if you're a portrait photographer, you're going to get a lot out of this as well. So stick around if you wanna hear what you absolutely must have inside of your contract and then where to go to find a really airtight contract that's actually legally binding. Now, photography contracts are not just in place to protect us as photographers, but they're also in place to protect your clients and make sure that everybody is covered and everybody's happy with the agreement that they're being entered into. So if you hire a photographer and they don't have a photography contract, I would tell you that's not a professional. Be careful because you might not get what you want out of that exchange. So the same goes for you as the photographer. You need to be using contracts. So first of all, if you're not using contracts at all in your business, stop it. Well, I should say start using contracts because it's just a matter of time until you run into some trouble, like legal trouble that could cost you a ton of money if you're not using contracts. Now, if you're using a contract and you don't know if it's good, this is the perfect video for you because I'm gonna cover all the things that absolutely must be in your contract and even some places to go to make sure that you're using airtight, legally binding contracts. I feel like I should also say, this is not legal advice. I'm not a lawyer. I can't tell you what laws are in your state or in your country, so you need to talk to a lawyer, but I can point you in the direction of some really talented professionals and some good contracts that you can get a hold of today. All right, so things you absolutely must have inside of your photography contract. The first one is the names of your clients, the date of the event, and an outline of what they are buying into, right? So I can't tell you how many times I've actually been sent contracts or I have clients that I'm helping other photographers go over their contracts and it doesn't clearly state who is involved, what services are being exchanged, and what date it actually happens on. So that's the most important thing at the very top of your contract. One clause I think every photographer should have in their contract is a harassment clause. This could be sexual harassment, violence, or anything in between where you feel unsafe on a shoot, at a wedding day, or anything like that. And I think that this is so important to have inside of a contract because I think especially as women, it's just a matter of time before we run into a situation where we do not feel comfortable, but we don't feel that we're able to remove ourselves from a dangerous situation or something that's just uncomfortable for ourselves or our team because we're paid to be there. So it's extremely important that you have a sexual harassment and a violent situation inside of your contract under a harassment clause, and so that you can so clearly explain what is and is not acceptable and what images that you will be liable for if you have to remove yourself from a dangerous situation. Next is an inclement weather clause / acts of God. And I think this is important because none of us can control the weather, but the weather greatly impacts whether or not we're sometimes able to even be in a location. Let's say there's a hurricane or a blizzard or even an earthquake. If you are physically unable to be somewhere, your contract needs to state what exactly happens and who is held liable at that point. So if you don't have something that pertains to rescheduling, weather, or things that you can't control, like acts of God, you definitely need that in your contract. Next, you should have a cancellation policy. Now, whether the wedding just doesn't happen or the client decides to go in a different direction, you need to clearly state exactly how the client can cancel and void the contract that they've entered into and what money would be owed from either side of the party. It should state whether or not they would get their retainer back, whether or not they would be held liable for the rest of the monies paid if it hasn't yet been paid, that kind of thing. In your contract, you should also have a model release clause, a copyright and ownership clause, and something about editing. Now, I put this all in one, but these could very much be different clauses. Basically, who owns the image copyright, what can the client do with the image, and what can you do with the image? So that's the model release part. Can you use this on social media? You should very clearly state whether or not you are allowed to, as the business owner, use the images on social media or for any kind of marketing purposes. And then of course, what the client can do with the images. Can they edit the images? Can they alter the images? And if you're not okay with your client editing your own images and putting them on Instagram with a filter, for example, you have to say that in your contract and very clearly outline what they can and cannot do with the images. Next, you need to cover late fees and payment schedule. So it should very clearly state when the amounts that are due to you as the photographer are due, and then what happens if they're late. How can they pay you? Is it okay to pay by check? If so, put an address. Is it okay to pay by credit card? Give them a reason or an actual explanation of how to do that. So what are acceptable forms of payment? When are they due? And what happens if they're late? That all goes in your fees and payment schedule section. You should also have a summary of deliverables for both sides. So this section would cover what exactly they're buying with you, or how many hours, maybe an album, maybe digital downloads, that kind of thing. Like, what exactly is the party getting from you, and then what are you getting from your clients? So are they paying you in money? Are you doing an exchange of goods or time, services, any kind of thing like that? So what is each side getting very clearly? This would be inside of your deliverables. I also think it would be good to have a mediation clause, meaning if either side of the party, you or your clients, feel that the contract isn't being upheld and you have any kind of discrepancy on anything inside the contract, that you would go to a mediator instead of court, or that they could sue you just right off the bat. And basically this would keep it a lot more affordable to you if a client felt that you had breached the contract and they decide they would like to take legal action. They'd have to go through a mediator, which would be a lot more affordable. That's just my understanding. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but I think that it would help it from becoming this huge blown up lawsuit where the contract would have to be dealt with under mediation, I think. Ask a lawyer. Two other things I think are really crucial for wedding photographers especially are a meals policy inside of your contract. So the meal on a wedding day, are they gonna feed you? How many meals do they have to provide? When do they provide them? I always say ideally while the guests are eating. This almost never happens, but it's fine. I put it in there because every once in a while, my clients really do read that and take it to heart, and they know that if they feed me when their guests are eating, they're gonna get better pictures because I'm not gonna be off in some back room when speeches are happening because they fed me after everyone else. So you have to put your meal requirements in your contract, and then put in there, if they decide not to feed you for whatever reason, or they can't, or they forget, what happens? Are you allowed to leave? Are you being held liable for all the images while you're out getting yourself a sandwich? That kind of thing. So a meals policy is really important. And then the next clause that I think you should have in your contract are other photographers. This is a little sticky. If you go to a wedding and then there's a bunch of other photographers around blocking your shots, trying to get the images, or also using those images to build a business, I've had this happen. You need to have something in your contract that clearly states that you'll be the only professional commissioned photographer, and that gives you some rights for protecting that. So making sure that, like, if someone's in the way of your shot, that you can let them know that you're gonna need them to stop, and that if a client does not tell their guest to stop, getting in your way or taking pictures or putting them up on a website claiming that those are their images, that they would be in breach of contract. So making sure that you are the sole photographer at an event is also a good clause to have inside of your contract. You should, of course, also have signatures at the bottom of your entire contract, and then initials at certain sections. Now, a lawyer could tell you what sections are absolutely crucial to have the signatures on, and that's why I'm going to recommend a site for you in just a minute on where to get a contract. But you definitely want to make sure that you have both parties and yourself. If it's a wedding, there's a couple getting married, so both parties sign that contract, and yourself, just so that everybody's on the same page. And this is also another reason why I don't have parents sign, or just one member of the couple getting married, because I want to make sure that we're all on the same page. You could have a bride hire you and their fiance kind of doesn't know what's going on or what they're agreeing to. So it's important to have everybody sign at the very end of the contract. Now, if you're looking for a really well-written contract that has all of these clauses that we talked about here here today, but also a few more that we didn't even get into. And you want them to be legally binding, of course. Go to thelegalpage.com. Paige is amazing. She is a photographer, but also a lawyer, which I am not. So go to her, buy her contracts. She's actually having some Black Friday sales. I don't know if they'll still be going on at the time of this video, but right now she's having some sales. So this is a perfect time to invest in a contract that's going to protect you and protect your client. And I think that your contracts are one area that you definitely don't want to skimp on. To make contracts a lot easier for my clients to sign and read and go through quickly and not have to scan and deal with all that stuff, I use HoneyBook. I have a whole playlist on HoneyBook. This is a client management software that I use for my questionnaires, my brochures, my contracts, and it's also how I get paid. I find that I get booked a lot faster because I use HoneyBook. I'll put a code down below for 50% off your first year, but you can also click this video and hear a little bit more about what all I do with HoneyBook. But I would say getting contracts signed faster and easier is probably the best thing about HoneyBook, so definitely check it out. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you next week.